My name is Elise Hallberg. Within these walls, that identity once signified nothing beyond an unused seat, the silent presence, or something worse, a temporary visitor. Yesterday evening, I occupied my family's lengthy mahogany dining surface. For the first occasion in 6 years. Nobody rose in welcome. Nobody spoke my identity aloud. They simply observed initially my footwear, then examined the jacket I hadn't replaced since university. Odessa, my sibling, raised her beverage and grinned as though following a rehearsed prompt. Still taking public transportation, Elise, she inquired with gentle arrogance. I remained wordless. I simply arranged my cloth napkin, grasped my drinking glass, and allowed the satin fabric of my sleeve to shift slightly. That moment revealed everything to them. The jewelry piece. Mother's utensil froze halfway to her mouth. Father's fingers whitened gripping his wine vessel. Odessa's smugness vanished completely. A cushion-cut gemstone in antique mounting. One among 5 created, valued beyond everything within that space combined. Oh, this item, I mentioned, rotating it delicately around my digit. Simply something I acquired during an unremarkable weekday. I hadn't returned to discuss finances. I returned to allow the quiet to communicate. And this occasion, they were genuinely paying attention. The sound of metal utensils seemed amplified beyond reason, as though the dwelling itself attempted to emphasize my displacement. I claimed my position at the distant end of the surface. The location that previously belonged to my ancestor, and nobody assisted with adjusting my chair. I hadn't anticipated their help. Odessa was already describing some residents she'd marketed in Pacific Heights. Cash purchasers, naturally, she declared with dramatic amusement. I informed them the scenery wasn't worth $9 million, yet they persisted. Mother's jewelry caught the illumination as she smiled. That's our daughter, she stated, reaching for additional roasted poultry. Gordon, more precisely my mother's second spouse, murmured agreement without raising his gaze from his meal. I'd overlooked his talent for acting as though I was absent. Nobody inquired about my well-being. Nobody offered refreshments, and still I remained there, folding my napkin properly across my thighs as though I hadn't been removed from every photograph in the corridor merely 3 years past. Odessa lifted her glass once more. To relatives, she announced, focusing on me, including those who appear like apparitions. The gesture remained unacknowledged. I reached toward the creamy potatoes. Nobody assisted with passing them. I had to stretch across someone's arm to obtain them. I served myself modestly, not from timidity, but because it seemed pointless to take additional portions. Mother cleared her voice. Still wearing that garment? She asked, indicating vaguely toward my shoulder. It's fine wool, I responded without looking upward. Her mouth curved almost unnoticeably. Second hand, then. I allowed the criticism to pass. I hadn't arrived to justify clothing choices. I hadn't come to justify anything. Their discussions continued flowing around me as though I wasn't woven into the fabric. Odessa began detailing some charitable event in the city. Gordon discussed recreational activities. Mother described the congregation's new colored window. Fundraising as though it was the Vatican's next architectural achievement. Eventually someone posed the question I'd been anticipating. So Elise, Mother said casually, cutting her poultry, still working on that small charity organization? Or has the municipality condemned the structure already? Before I could respond, Odessa leaned forward. Oh, please. She's probably occupying some space illegally in the district. Housing costs too expensive for aspirations, correct? I placed my utensil down carefully. My sleeve moved as I reached for my beverage. The gemstone reflected light once more. This time they observed it completely. Odessa blinked initially. Mother's mouth opened slightly. Gordon stared, attempting to comprehend what he was witnessing. Is that Mother's? She began. I rotated the jewelry slowly with my thumb just once. Something I acquired, I said quietly, during an unremarkable weekday. And just like that, the meal ceased pretending to be sustenance. It became a confrontation of four. A moment, nobody spoke. I could hear the old temperature control activating in the hallway. That subtle rattling in the ventilation that used to make my grandmother chuckle. This dwelling coughs when it deceives, she once told me when I was young and still believed adults only lied accidentally. I looked along the table's length. Her chair, the one at the very terminus, the one nobody ever dared touch, sat vacant. No cushion, no place setting, just bare wood and the slight depression on the armrests where her hands used to rest, fingers hardened from decades of needlework, preserving, tending. My voice emerged quieter than intended. Nobody prepared a place for her. Odessa didn't even glance over. She's not returning, Elise. I nodded once. Neither am I. Not if this is how you've treated her memory. Mother sighed as though I had embarrassed her before polite society. We remember her sufficiently. We donated the sewing equipment to charity. You want recognition for that, too? I didn't respond. I didn't need to. After the meal, when plates were removed and the silence became environmental again, I stepped into the corridor. The display wall used to be a collection of family history. Sepia photographs of my grandmother's youth, instant pictures from holiday meals. The faded print of her on the rear porch holding a fruit dessert like it was precious metal. They were all absent. I in their place, Odessa's business awards, Gordon's sporting trophies, a framed advertisement for some investment conference Mother claimed she co-organized. At the center, where Grandma Liza's portrait used to hang, was a full-color marketing piece featuring Odessa in a white jacket and perfect smile. Odessa Shaw Properties. We sell more because we care more. I stood motionless. My hand found the frame's edge. It was frigid. Impossibly frigid. She constructed this dwelling, I said softly to nobody. Odessa's voice came from behind me. And you soaked it in self-pity. I turned slowly. She was already stepping into the light, wineglass in hand, smile brittle. No, I replied. I just refused to sell her memory for publicity. Her expression didn't change initially, but I saw the flicker behind her eyes, a single muscle tightening along her jaw. The meal ended not long afterward, wrapped in a tension that didn't loosen even when the dishes were cleaned. Nobody thanked me for helping clear the table. They never had, but before I left the room, I walked to the old chair at the head of the table, the one they'd left vacant, and gently laid the purple shawl across its back. The same shawl Grandmother wore every winter, soft and worn with tiny pearls sewn in. Her protection, she used to say, for cold rooms. I didn't speak a word. I let the gesture communicate instead. The spare room hadn't changed much. Same damaged dresser, same floral window coverings that barely blocked the porch illumination, but it wasn't really a room for visitors. Not anymore. It felt like storage for everything they didn't want to see, but weren't ready to discard. I opened the top drawer of the dresser and found it right where I'd left it the last time I'd returned years ago when the air still smelled like hope, a purple envelope with my name in flowing script. Inside, the handwriting trembled, but the words did not. My Elise, if they forget, you let them. But don't forget yourself, and don't forget what I concealed for you. The key is real. The silence isn't. Speak. Grandmother, I turned the envelope over. Attached to the back was a small corroded skeleton key. Delicate but heavy, like it had waited years to be held again. I didn't sleep much that night. Just lay awake clutching the key in my hand like it could unlock something within me, not just a door to by morning. I was already dressed, coat fastened, hair secured back. I tucked the key into my pocket and drove 20 minutes north past the town's edge to a small law office nestled between a closed pastry shop and a faded cleaning establishment. Durant and Merrick, attorneys at LAWMR. Horace Durant was older than I remembered, thinner, slower, but his eyes brightened when I entered. She said you might come, he told me, nodding once. She made arrangements, very clear ones. He handed me a thick folder, certified, notarized, witnessed. The authentic will. Grandma Liza had changed everything 2 years before her death. The house, the Montana land, the savings accounts, the jewelry box she never opened for anyone. Every last bit was mine. She said it would cause trouble, Durant added quietly, but she trusted you to handle it. There was also a letter, this one typed, addressed to my mother and Odessa, instructing them to vacate the premises within 30 days if they contested the will. Durant handed it over with a slight grimace. They forged another one, didn't they? I asked. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I stepped out of the office, the autumn air cut clean through me, but I didn't shiver. I had something stronger than warmth now. I had proof that night, back at the house. I stood by the fireplace, staring at the portrait of my grandmother that somehow hadn't been taken down. I slipped the skeleton key from my coat pocket, held it up to the light, and whispered, "You trusted me. I won't let them bury that." I didn't know yet what the key opened, but I knew what it unlocked. Resolve. 3 weeks later, I stood in a courtroom that smelled like old varnish and dust, facing the people who had once called me invisible. My mother, Delia, sat in a cream blazer that made her look more brittle than dignified. Odessa was beside her, all in black, like she was the one in mourning. Gordon, of course, had shown up late and red-eyed, still carrying the air of a man who thought his name alone should grant him victory. I didn't look at them. Instead, I kept my eyes on the judge, an older woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, and a gaze that didn't blink without reason. To her left sat Mr. Durant, my grandmother's attorney, calm and composed with the real will in hand. To her right, the document they'd forged, riddled with inconsistent typefaces, an incorrect middle initial, and a signature that looked like it had been copied from a check. I've reviewed both submissions, the judge began, her voice steady, and the evidence presented is troubling. Odessa shifted. Delia's lips went tight. Durant stood. We'd also like to submit this. He held up a flash drive. The judge nodded. On the screen behind her, the courtroom projector flickered to life. A shaky recording began to play. Mom's voice first, hushed but clear, "We'll keep her comfortable, then sell the land before Elle catches wind." Then Gordon, "That Montana property alone could pay off the Hellick. Don't tell Elise. And finally, Odessa, if she asks questions, I'll handle it. She always folds when you push hard enough." The silence that followed wasn't just awkward. It was annihilating. Delia's face drained of color. Gordon's jaw worked like he wanted to say something, but the words didn't come. Odessa stared straight ahead, blinking too often. I rose slowly. The judge hadn't asked me to speak, but no one stopped me either. My grandmother wasn't confused, I said. She was clear about what she saw, about what she wanted, and about who she trusted. You didn't erase her, you erased yourselves. The judge cleared her throat. The forged document is hereby nullified. The court recognizes the 2022 will as the legally binding version. All assets therein are to be transferred solely to Ms. Elise Hallberg. She glanced at the defense table. Restitution in the amount of $216,000 is due to Ms. Hallberg, adjusted for interest. Effective immediately. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, restraining orders will be issued. The gavel struck once, hard, final. No one stood. No one clapped. Justice doesn't need applause, only acknowledgement. I gathered my folder. I saw Gordon slumped back, stunned. Delia's hands gripped the edge of the table like it might keep her from falling. Odessa looked like someone had pulled the mask right off her face. I didn't linger. Outside, the air was sharp but cleansing. The courthouse steps felt higher than they'd been going up, but I didn't stumble. I descended with purpose, like someone who no longer had to shrink to survive. Behind me, the courtroom door creaked shut. Ahead of me, the truth had already opened. Something far more permanent. 2 weeks later, I opened the doors to a borrowed space downtown. It used to be a church, stained glass still filtered the light in slow, soft colors. But now it was mine, if only for a day. I called it unspoken. There were no podiums, no speeches, just tables, easels, quiet corners. On the back wall, I pinned the shawl. Her shawl, pale lavender with pearl details, frayed at the edges, folded as if she'd just taken it off to pour tea. Next to it, her recipe cards, yellowed and smudged, a half-finished quilt, the last letter she ever wrote. A photo of her as a young girl in Mississippi, barefoot on a porch, eyes already carrying the weight of generations. Each piece was labeled in small print, Liza Hallberg. Unseen, unspoken, unforgettable. At first, the space was still. Then slowly, it filled. Church friends, neighbors, strangers who had once been touched by her quiet generosity. A man in scrubs stood frozen before her handwritten poem. She paid my son's tuition, he whispered. Said it was just extra change. Wouldn't even let us say thank you. An older woman touched the frame of a black and white photo. She used to bring soup every week. Said it tasted better when no one knew who made it. I nodded but didn't speak. Stories flowed like warm water, so gentle, yet so unstoppable. It wasn't about inheritance anymore. It was about legacy. Real legacy, the kind you can't list on a ledger. Then the door opened. I didn't need to turn. I felt it. Delia's heels hit the floor like accusations. Odessa walked 2 steps behind her, head low, but eyes scanning everything, calculating. They reached the quilt wall. This is slander, Mom hissed, voice shaking but still sharp. You've made a circus out of family grief. I didn't respond. A man in a linen shirt approached her calmly. Hugo, the gallery manager. This is a private exhibition, he said. Invitation only. Odessa looked at me, pleading this time. Why are you doing this? I met her eyes. You buried her while she was still breathing. I'm just digging her back out. Before either could reply, a woman with a press badge stepped in. Ms. Delia Hallberg? We're following up on a forged will filed last year under your name. The silence hit harder than any headline. They left. No words, no parting threats. Just vanish like smoke when the room stops feeding the fire. Later, as the last guests drifted out, I stood in front of her quilt again. She hadn't needed me to defend her. She'd only needed someone to remember her out loud. Montana was colder. Then I remembered. The kind of cold that didn't just sit on your skin, it soaked into your breath, your bones, your memory. The property was tucked behind a narrow dirt road, just past a bent wooden sign that said, "Private, no hunting." Pines stood like sentinels, and the sky above them stretched wide, too big for any one person to carry alone. In the center of it all stood a single outbuilding, weathered siding, tin roof, a brass plaque nailed crookedly to the door, Liza's vault. I stood in front of it longer than I meant to. The skeleton key in my hand felt heavier now. Real. Final. The lock gave with a sigh, like it had been waiting to breathe again. Inside, the air was dry and still, with the faint scent of cedar. And old paper. Boxes lined the shelves as neat, labeled in her handwriting. Paris 1963. Taxes, do not touch unless you're a lease. That one was near the floor. I reached for it with trembling hands. Inside, a leather-bound accordion folder filled with documents, legal, financial, personal. Stocks and companies I'd never heard of. Deeds. A bank statement with more zeros than I could process. Quiet wealth, carefully guarded. Beneath that, wrapped in a silk scarf I recognized from her church days, was a velvet ring. Box. It clicked open like it had been closed just yesterday. Inside sat a diamond ring, oval cut, vintage setting, heavy with presents. The one I wore at dinner, but this time it wasn't just beautiful, it was known. Tucked underneath the satin cushion was a handwritten note, short and final, for your own hand, not anyone else's. Let them see it when they call you worthless. But remember, its weight isn't in the stone. It's in the years you carried silence and still chose to stay kind. I stared at it for a long time. Not the diamond, the note. Her words. Her knowing. I thought about every time I had sat quietly while they mocked me. Every time I passed on explaining myself because it wouldn't have mattered. Every time I gave more than I was asked and received less than I deserved, and I slid the ring back on my finger, not like a trophy, not like a symbol of victory, but like a seal. A reminder that someone once saw me fully and didn't flinch. There was more in the vault. A savings bond she'd never cashed. A tin box of letters she'd written but never sent. One to me, one to my father, one marked simply a for truth. I didn't open them all. Not yet. I stepped outside with the ring on my hand and the flannel blanket. She always kept in her truck slung over my shoulders. The wind in Montana doesn't whisper. It listens. That night I didn't stay in a hotel. I lit a small fire in the clearing, boiled water on a camping stove, and sat in the quiet, surrounded by the one thing that had never turned on me, the land she left behind, the land I now owned. I didn't say much out loud, just 4 words spoken. Low into the air, thank you for seeing me. I returned to the house just before sunrise. Pasadena was still asleep. The streetlights blinked against the early morning fog, and the neighbors' windows glowed faintly, unaware that anything had shifted. But everything had. I slipped through the side gate, the same one I used to sneak through as a teenager. The backyard was wild now. Overgrown weeds, broken trellis, tomato cages rusted and empty. The garden my grandmother once tended with her bare hands had been forgotten, just like her. I knelt beside the old raised bed, pulled on her gardening gloves, still a size too big, and pressed my palms into the soil. It was still soft. Still good. I pulled out the envelope she'd left me. On the back, in her handwriting, it read, "Last summer's seeds." Inside were tiny, dry tomato seeds, heirlooms, speckled, saved like secrets. I planted them slowly, one by one. I didn't rush. Each seed felt like a sentence unfinished, like a story waiting to rise. When I finished, I stood and looked around. The yard. There was no applause, no audience, just wind brushing through the rosemary bush and the faint scent of lemons from the kitchen window. Inside, the house was quiet. For the first time, it didn't feel like it was watching me, judging me. I poured a cup of chamomile tea, wrapped myself in her flannel blanket, and stood by the window. The morning light spilled across the floor, landing right at the edge of the garden I'd just turned, like the sun itself was blessing what had been buried too long. The ring on my hand sparkled again. Not loud, not dramatic, just present. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about being seen, not for what I could prove or earn, but for what I'd chosen to carry in silence, for who I had remained even when no one was watching. Some stories don't shout, they grow. And that morning, I saw the first green shoot breaking through the soil. It was enough.